Back when GTA Online was released to the world in 2013, the only performance upgrades available were brakes, engine, transmission and turbo. But midway through 2014, another was added to that list in the shape of spoilers. While brakes improved the car's ability to stop and turbo increased power for better acceleration and top speeds, aftermarket spoilers became necessary on any car that had them in order to increase the traction bar within the game. This meant that every car with a spoiler instantly became quicker as they could take corners at higher speeds than they previously used to be able to. Examples of big losers in this change were the Adder in the supercars class and the Exemplar in coupes, which didn't have spoiler upgrades available to them, so suddenly found themselves in a worse position relative to where they used to be as all other cars around them with spoilers got quicker. One could argue that this was the start of a trend that has continued over the years of cars in GTA getting more and more traction, with straight line performance staying the same, making them easier and less interesting to drive. One could also argue that the traction to power ratio of the Adder, thanks to having a relatively beefy engine and no spoiler, is one of the best in the game and makes it one of the most fun to drive with against others in a competitive setting, alongside other sports classics and muscle cars. But that's an argument for another time. Since that change, spoilers have become commonplace, with almost every new car having a spoiler upgrade of some description. Some cars even get a traction boost from other upgrades if they don't officially have a spoilers category, like the front bumper modification on the Toros. Some cars, like the T20, get active spoilers that increase traction when they're raised. But that wasn't the end of the story for traction bonuses, because with 2016's Cunning Stunts update, a new breed of cars were added with a new concept: downforce. This became an increasingly common thing to see on higher performance cars moving forward, to the point that some of the quickest cars around the lap have all utilised downforce modifiers rather than traditional spoilers for a long time now, although a non-stock spoiler is still required to be added in Los Santos Customs to get more out of the downforce. For more info on that, check out the Ultimate Setup Guide video I did out for cars in GTA, which will be linked in the description and pinned comment. A lesser known third change to traction bonuses came with the Doomsday Heist update in late 2017, bringing a new breed of downforce cars that work differently to those in the past and has remained the default way of high performance cars to generate their speed until the open wheel cars were released in late 2019 and handled things very differently. But while most cars fit nicely into one of the three groups of traction bonuses, those being old spoiler, old downforce and new downforce, some are outliers, and because these very specific cars straddle the lines between multiple traction bonus methods, they're obviously broken. It's classic Rockstar, of course. The cars in question: the Italia RSX, Comet S2 and S2 Cabrio, and X80 Proto. All of them could be, and probably were intended to be, quicker than what they currently are. In this video we'll delve into how they're broken, why they're broken, and what it would look like if they weren't broken. And it will inevitably take us on a journey through how spoilers and downforce works in this game. Strap yourselves in. Now, as is natural when trying to collect, sift through and explain 8 years worth of changes to the way cars work in GTA, some of the finer details of all of this won't be covered in this video in the interest of time and scope. But if you're interested in understanding everything that's going on, check the description for a document that explains everything in great detail, created by Adam, Chili and Nismo, and a big thanks to them for their help in researching all of this in order to put this video together, with essentially all of this info coming directly from the handling files and game code itself. So to gloss over the basics, air moving over a car in real life pushes it into the ground, with higher speeds generating more force. High performance cars use this property of physics to try to generate as much downwards force as possible, with the use of front and rear wings for example, in order to stay stuck to the road at higher and higher speeds during corners. A car without such help is more reliant on the grip produced by the tyres biting into the road surface. And this real-life physics property is modelled in GTA as well, which is why you can see cars being visibly pushed down at higher speeds. In addition to that though, each wheel on a car in GTA has its own value for downforce. Every car in the game has a downforce value attached to each of its wheels, and it's this value that determines how grippy the car is, with higher values pushing the wheel into the ground more, increasing its traction. Spoilers and downforce modifiers are acting on this value to increase the traction of each wheel. Most cars in the game, even those newly added if they're not high performance super or sport cars, use the same spoiler mechanics that have been in the game since 2014. Without any spoilers, all cars in this group have a flat wheel downforce value, which from this point on I'm going to abbreviate to WDV, of 0.035. When a spoiler is applied, the WDV doubles to 0.07. Now obviously every car also has its own traction stats in the handling files that are unique to it, which is why a stock entity can go around a corner at higher speeds than a stock adder, and cars that have higher base traction will get an even bigger benefit from a spoiler. Some cars from the Cunning Stunts update in 2016, most notably the RE7B, Tyrus and ETR1, had a new value in the handling files called F downforce modifier, which allowed the WDV to be calculated dynamically on the fly. For these cars, and cars that have this feature when they were added later, the WDV is actually 0 when not moving and increases exponentially until the car reaches 90% of its top speed. At that point the WDV is 0.035 multiplied by the downforce modifier value. As an example, the RE7B has a downforce modifier value of 3.5, meaning its final WDV is 0.1225. When a custom spoiler is added, this value increases by 25% more, rather than doubled like with regular spoilers, meaning that a fully upgraded RE7B has a maximum WDV of around 0.15. That's more than double the value of the 0.07 experienced with a regular car, and explains why these downforce cars are so grippy at higher speeds. Naturally though, that comes at the cost of grip at lower speeds, with these cars having worse performance in slow speed corners as their WDV drops below 0.07 when travelling below a certain speed. In some cars that don't have very high downforce modifier values, meaning values that are in the 1 to 2 range with a value of 1 being equivalent to having no extra downforce, it would actually be better to have the old mechanics and a regular spoiler. This can be seen with the Italy GTB, which uses standard mechanics, and the Italy GTB Custom, which has a fairly low downforce modifier value of 1.5 in comparison to the 3.5 value of the RE7B. Because the cars are basically otherwise identical, on most circuits that aren't full of longer, faster corners, the regular GTB will actually end up being quicker because the GTB Custom can't keep up enough speed on a normal track to experience better grip from its downforce than what the regular version can with its normal spoiler. In essence, it works just like high downforce cars in real life. The quicker you're travelling, the more downforce you're experiencing, and the faster you can go around corners. The newer downforce mechanics found on cars from the Doomsday Heist update onwards use values in the hundreds for the downforce modifier. For example, the Emirates has a value of 350 in comparison to the 3.5 of the RE7B. Though this is probably just used to differentiate them from the older mechanics because the calculations all divide by 100 first before doing anything with those values. For the newer mechanics, it's a very similar situation to what we just saw, except there's a lower cap at the top and a higher cap at the bottom. We use the Emirates as an example and compare it to the RE7B since, after the initial division of 100, they basically share the same downforce modifier value of 3.5 anyway. While the RE7B has a WDV of 0 when standing still, the Emirates has a WDV of 0.037. At the top end, the RE7B's WDV is 0.1225, whereas that of the Emirates is only 0.105. So the Emirates still experiences some good grip at low speeds in comparison to the RE7B, but doesn't have the same levels of grip at high speeds. While the WDV of the RE7B increases exponentially immediately upon moving, the WDV of the Emirates stays at a constant 0.037 until it reaches 40% of its top speed, then increases exponentially until maxing out at 90% like the RE7B does. Essentially, the new downforce mechanics allow for the best of both worlds, with the cars still being able to perform somewhat competently at low speeds, but not quite having the same performance at high speeds. This basically serves to negate the problems seen with the Italy GTB and its custom variant that I just mentioned. Non-stock spoilers on these cars again increase the WDV by 25% just like before. I'm only going to touch on the downforce mechanics for open wheel cars because it's not the focus of this video, but the open wheel cars act slightly differently again. It is however the same principles, with WDVs all increasing until the car reaches 95% of its top speed. But custom wings have unique modifiers that only affect the WDV of the front wheels or the rear wheels, depending on whether it's a front wing or rear wing being applied. With all the wing options changing the WDV of front and rear wheels, there are many ways to set up these cars, as we covered in detail in the open wheel cars lap time testing video, which will be linked in the description and offers a lot more information on this. There is one final type of traction increase that we need to cover, and that's active spoilers. These are the things you'll find on the back of the T20, Furia or Ignis that raise up as you reach a certain speed. They essentially act identically to a regular spoiler mechanics, with a WDV of 0.035 when the spoiler is down and a WDV of 0.07 when the spoiler is up. There are some special cases like the Nero and XA21 which have slightly higher WDVs than normal when the spoilers are raised, but they largely work the same when raised as if you applied a regular spoiler to any non-downforce car. One thing to note is that active spoilers always override regular spoiler upgrades and downforce modifier values. For example, the XA21 and X80 Proto have active spoilers as well as upgrades in Los Santos Customs that increase traction, and the Italia RSX has an active spoiler as well as regular spoiler upgrades and a downforce modifier. But none of them make any difference because the active spoiler behaviour always takes precedence and overrides everything else. Speaking of the Italia RSX, what's the deal with that car? It feels so fast but also really slow at the same time. The Comet S2 is another one that looks like it should be quick based on the handling files but gets a mediocre lap time. Both suffer from poor cornering ability, and the reason is related to their active spoilers. This also applies to the relatively new Comet S2 Cabrio, which is basically almost a carbon copy of the regular Comet S2. Now, these are the only 3 cars in the game that have active spoilers, regular spoiler upgrades and a downforce modifier, and while the active spoiler behaviour still takes precedence, I at least find that an interesting coincidence. In the end though, it doesn't matter because these 3 cars all have an active spoiler that force a constant WDV of 0.035. It doesn't double to 0.07 like all other cars with active spoilers. They're all essentially permanently stuck in a state equivalent to a regular car with no spoiler upgrade. The active spoilers on these cars basically force them to not use the downforce modifiers that they have to gain extra performance, while at the same time not presenting any benefit to cornering ability on their own. Whether this is intentional or not is impossible to know. Perhaps a dev who didn't know better thought that by forcing the active spoiler to not work, it would allow the downforce modifier to work instead. Obviously that's not the case. If they had an active spoiler that worked as normal, both Comet S2s would get lap times around the 1 minute 2 second range, which would put them on the same pace as the Comet SR and around the top 5 in the sports class. If they were using the downforce modifier instead, they wouldn't be much quicker than they are now, and they'd actually be slower on tracks with more slow speed corners because their downforce modifiers are actually a pretty small 1.2. Meanwhile, the Italia RSX would improve substantially, regardless of whether it was helped by a normal active spoiler or the downforce modifier, and become easily the quickest sports car in the game. The car has the potential of getting a sub 58 second lap time with the active spoiler working as it should, and a sub 57 second lap time with the downforce modifier of over 3 that it has working as it should. It should be noted that these lap times are quicker than the Krieger and Emirates at the top of the Supers class and closing in on Vigilante and open wheel car levels of lap time. So maybe it's a good thing that the RSX in particular doesn't work as it should. Regardless of whether it had a normal spoiler bonus, the active spoiler bonus, or using the downforce modifier that it has, if it was working properly, the Italia RSX would be a sports car with a better lap time than all supercars and only beaten by open wheelers. But as of right now, both the RSX and the Comet S2s struggle in the corners because, just like the old Adda and unlike most other cars these days, they essentially don't get any benefit from a spoiler upgrade, despite having an active spoiler and spoiler upgrades in Los Santos Customs. One final broken car, and this one definitely isn't intended behaviour, is the X80 Proto. The X80's flaps act as an active spoiler, increasing its WDV as the tilt of the flaps increases. It starts out at 0.035 like usual, and as the flaps tilt slightly upon moving, raises to 0.042 when travelling in a straight line. When one of the flaps is in its most upright position, when cornering, the car's WDV increases to the usual 0.07. However, depending on where you are on the map, the X80 will experience different behaviour when getting a WDV increase when turning. Being on the left side of the map will make the right flap have the final say on the car's WDV, and being on the right side of the map will make the left flap have the final say on the car's WDV. Since the flap that activates is the flap that's on the side of the direction you're turning, this can have some interesting effects. If you're on the right hand side of the map and turning left, you'll get the full traction bonus from that left flap. But if you're on the right hand side of the map and turning right, the right flap isn't doing anything and you get no traction bonus. The opposite is true if you're on the left side of the map or driving around a circuit that crosses a line between the two halves of the map. It's basically like driving with a custom spoiler in some corners and a stock spoiler in other corners. The only way to fully experience what driving the X80 Proto should be like is to have a circuit that crosses the middle of the map and only have right turns on the west side and left turns on the east side. So we've pretty much covered the full story of grip increases on cars in GTA Online, from the very early days when there was no way to increase grip to now where there are multiple different methods and bugs to go along with them. And the irony of it all for me personally is that the original cars were the best. Over time we've seen a general trend to more grippy cars, but the power driving them forward hasn't seen the same level of improvement. The higher downforce cars are for sure an interesting experiment, but they're really boring and frankly bad to race with. Open wheel cars, for example, can take corners at such high speeds but have really poor top speeds in comparison. That leads to cars that can take most corners at full throttle, which completely removes any element of skill involved in braking, taking the correct racing lines, etc. Some of the best cars to race with these days are those with not a lot of grip and really high top speeds. The Pariah is a perfect example, since even with its regular spoiler upgrade, it isn't the most grippy car in the world, and its powerful engine and super high top speed require some skills to be able to handle. And in possibly the greatest irony, one of the most fun and skill based cars to use for races in the supercars class at least is the Adda. With its lack of spoiler upgrade and still respectable top speed, it's a challenge to drive while providing some excellent side-by-side racing experiences. If anything, that should be the power to traction ratio baseline for most supercars, but I get the impression Rockstar have just been trying to consistently make cars easier to drive over the years as a whole. We're just lucky that we got outliers like the Pariah. Nevertheless, it is interesting to see how things have developed. I just hope that for the next GTA game we get cars with some higher top speeds and less traction. The fact that we now pretty much have cars at the top of the muscle and sport classics classes that handle just like bog standard sports cars when these classes used to be filled with somewhat challenging cars to race with says it all really. So I hope you enjoyed this journey into spoilers and downforce in GTA. Let me know all your thoughts down below in the comments, whether it's about how cars handle these days in terms of grip levels, or if you've got something to say about the broken cars like the X80 and RXX, and of course, like the video if you enjoyed. Thank you all so much for watching, I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.